So far, we've gone into you did a whole introduction, and you've gone over all the different mechanisms, type 1, type 2 obesity. But I believe now you're going to sort of go into the treatment side and tell people, okay, now you get it. This is what you need to do.
Exactly right, Doug. I think there's a group of psychologists in Connecticut that wrote a phenomenal book called Changing for Good. And it's the process by which people address addiction. And the first process is understanding what the issue is and contemplating this from your own personal perspective. And that's what we've tried to do in the first few chapters in this book, is get people to understand and have a degree of ownership of, I understand the issue is a substance abuse problem, not a food or a calorie problem. And yes, I have this problem, I want to fix it. So in this segment now, what we're going to do is it's going to be a very practical or pragmatic approach, and we are going to really list and explain exactly what goes into a very healthy diet. And I'm going to give those components, and I'm also going to clash a little bit with some of the conventional nutritional thinking in this and get you to think a slightly different way, because this isn't a diet. It's a way of life, and it's a transformation in your way of life. So the first thing is this. When it comes to individual items, and I think this is a mistake that a lot of doctors and a lot of dietitians make, is they do blood work and they measure deficiencies, and your vitamin B12 may be low, or your protein may be a little bit low. And what they do is they measure a number, and when that number is low, they replace that specific item. Well, Doug, the human body doesn't work that way. So the first analogy that I want to give you is this one. The greatest quarterback of all time, without argument from anybody, and I won't put up with any argument, is Tom Brady. I'm a Michigan guy, he's a Michigan guy, we're at Michigan together. So if you take Tom Brady and you put him on a football field against 11 other players on the defensive side of any team in the NFL, as great as Tom Brady is, he's totally useless without his own supporting cast. In other words, if he doesn't have an offensive line, if he doesn't have a running back, if he doesn't have wide receivers, if he doesn't have other players around him, no matter how great he is, he's totally useless. In exactly the same way, supplements, protein shakes, individual nutrient items, no matter how great they might be, no matter how desperately you need them, they're totally useless without a supportive cast. We as human beings are designed to eat food, and food is a very complex thing. A particular type of food may contain a lot of protein, but you need the fat, you need the minerals, you need the vitamins, you need all the other things as the supportive cast to help to make that work. For example, one of the classic things is vitamin D. Well, vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. If you just take a pill, it's not going to be absorbed. You might as well rub it on the wall, because you're just going to poop it out. It is not bioavailable. So we have to understand that nutrition is a team sport, and we have to eat complex foods in order to absorb the food properly. That's the first thing. So don't take individual items, and the more human beings have created it, the less useful it is going to be for you, no matter how much they've valued it in their advertising. The second point is this, and it's a critically important point. What we're doing right now is we're talking specifically to people with obesity. And there are two models for the treatment of obesity. The primary model that everybody uses, the diet model, is what's called a harm reduction model. In other words, they try to reduce the harm that an uncontrolled diet does. And they are specifically calorie-based. I know we've talked about this before. The problem with a harm reduction model is built into that harm reduction model is the concept of control. So they give you permission to have a little bit, but not a lot. They have an allowance. So if you've done well the whole day, you can have a little bit. You can have a fat bomb. You can have a little bit of a keto dessert. That may be all good and well for somebody that doesn't have a substance abuse problem. But for people trying to deal with obesity, by definition, like an alcoholic, they've lost control of the relationship. And therefore, we really have to get away from a diet that requires control. So if the diet says, okay, at the end of the day, you can have one little block of chocolate, that's all good and well. That's not going to harm anybody. But the problem with that is once you allow yourself to have that little block of chocolate, that means you've now got chocolate in your home. And you can't stop. So you have that first block, you keep circling back, and you kill the whole block. In the addiction model, it's about permission and abstinence. And if you're not supposed to have any chocolate, and if you don't have that chocolate around, no matter how desperate for some you are, you don't have access to it. So it's critically important that we don't follow a control model or a reward model or a harm reduction model. We follow the addiction model. The next critical thing is this. Remember what I talked about food being a team sport? Well, the nutritionists love to divide things into macros and micros, and that's a ridiculous concept. There is no such thing as macros and micros. There's not things that are purely there for energy and things that are there for purely for nutrition. Everything has a dual role, and it's important that we understand that. In fact, what's funny is the only pure macro is carbohydrates, and the whole point of this ketogenic diet is to get rid of the carbohydrates in our diet. So we have to understand how various things that give us energy work. The dominant source of energy for the human body is primarily designed to use fat as its primary fuel source. And almost every cell in the human body is optimally functional when it is burning fat. There are a couple of exclusions that need sugar. That's why we need our blood sugar there. But your blood sugar is a very, very, very tiny component of energy provision. And the human body clamps that blood sugar in a very tight space. So it's very important that you focus on consuming fat as your primary fuel source. The second thing, though, is a significant percentage of your diet should be fat. However, if you're an obese person trying to lose weight, don't supplement your diet with ketones. The best place to get your ketones from is from your own fat. Now, if you look like the Olsen twins, absolutely fine. You've got to supplement because otherwise you're going to dry up and blow away. But no obese person is in danger of dying of anorexia. So, not right away anyway. So please make sure you don't fall victim to the bulletproof coffees and the adding of all these supplements to your food. Have a high percentage of fat, but it's critically important that the majority of your calories, your energy, comes from your own fat supply. That's how you lose weight, okay? And the dominant source is fat. Protein is a very, very, very minor player when it comes to calorie provision for the body. Probably only 10 or 15 grams per day in the average human being goes towards calories, and that's the conversion by the liver from protein to sugar. Protein is primarily a structural component. So when we're eating protein, the protein is ideally should go to muscle repair, tissue building, tissue repair, as a hormone, as an enzyme. Almost every part of the body requires protein. And one of the next critical things about protein consists of a range of 21 amino acids, 9 of which are essential. What the word essential means is that they cannot be produced in the human body. We have to eat them. And there are a lot of shakes and manufactured proteins, which people say, oh, these are so great for you. You've got to have your protein shake. You've got to bulk up on protein. Absolutely not true, because the majority of those humanly manufactured protein sources do not contain the 9 essential amino acids. Just for the record, they are histidine, isoleucine, leucine, methionine, threonine, phenylalanine, tryptophan, valine, and lysine. Those are the amino acids we have to get in. And here's what's interesting about them. Those are primarily what we call structural amino acids. They're not designed to be used as calories. They're designed to structure our hormones, our enzymes, and our tissues, our muscles and other tissues. And in fact, what's interesting is when you're in ketosis, and this is why burning fat is so important, when you're in ketosis, the beta-hydroxybutyrate pathway, beta-hydroxybutyrate being one of the ketones, one of the 3 major ketones, actually when you're burning fat, when you're processing fat, protects those amino acids from entering the Krebs cycle. They don't allow them to be used as a source of energy. However, there are some amino acids, like alanine is the classic one, which is used as a source of energy. It can be used both structurally and as a source of energy. But the best place to get your protein is from animal sources because it's got everything in it. Remember, an animal has already used its protein to build tissue. So whether it's a renewable animal source like cheese or eggs, or the life of the animal has to be sacrificed to give you the protein, that's the best source of protein. Very often, vegetable proteins don't have all the essentials in them. So you've got to be very, very careful when you're verging on the vegetarian side to make sure that you get your essential proteins in. Exactly the same with fat. Okay? It's a difficult concept to understand, but all fat is not made equally. For example, when you eat carbohydrates and carbohydrates get turned into fat, that fat is totally useless as a structural fat. Remember, every cell that you have in your body has a wall, a membrane that's made of fat. That's structural fat. But when carbohydrates get converted to fat, those are all non-essential calorie type fatty acids. The only value of those fatty acids is for energy. They really don't have structural fat. The structural fat has to come from our diet. And everybody's aware of 3 omega fatty acids and 6 omega fatty acids. Why? Because those 2 fatty acids, alpha linolenic and linoleic acids, which are the one makes 3 omega fatty acids, the other than 6 omega fatty acids, are essential fatty acids. The human body cannot produce them internally. We have to eat them. And if you're not eating a sufficient source, typically of animal fats, maybe some nuts and seeds, you're not getting adequate fat in. And you cannot use healthy fat for structure in your body. Then you're incorporating unhealthy fats in your cell membranes. Those unhealthy fats, their double bonds are unstable. And when those double bonds rupture, what do they release? They release inflammatory cytokines. They release peroxide, hyperoxygen radicals, oxygen-free radicals, all the things we talk about inflammation. They activate genes that control cell division and cell death, so they cause cancers. They cause a lot of the inflammatory processes in our body. Whereas structural fats are very neutral. They're nice and fluid at body temperature, so they're mobile, and they don't have bonds that break very easily, so they're extremely stable and they're anti-inflammatory. So it behooves us to eat fat primarily from animal sources because it's very, very high in those 3 and 6 omega fatty acids that we have to consume. Okay, so the next thing to understand about the human body is something called homeostasis. Every action has a reaction. And the body controls a lot of different things by negative feedback pathways. So, for example, when I'm drinking water, we've drunken water as a species since we've been in existence. So there is a very, very powerful negative feedback system with water. If my brain says I'm thirsty, it's a horrible feeling, I start to drink, but as soon as my thirst is quenched, doesn't matter how much that took, I don't have to decide how much I'm going to drink. There's a negative feedback pathway from my brain to my head that says stop drinking, and it's very tightly controlled. We've talked about this before. When I drink alcohol, I have to decide how much I'm going to drink. And whatever I decide, I can pretty much drink, whether that's 2 bottles of beer or 10 bottles of beer. If I decide one day I'm going to drink 10 bottles of beer, I've done this experiment, I can flatten 10 bottles of beer. There's no way I can drink 10 bottles of water. So feedback is important. Why am I talking about this again? Because as you plan going into ketosis, the whole value of ketosis is to leverage the human body's feedback pathway to control your calorie consumption without ever feeling hungry. That's the key thing. When you go on Weight Watchers or Nutrisystem with Jenny Craig, those are intentional portion control diets that leave you hungry. They're forms of caloric deficit, which leaves you in a starvation mode, which is unsustainable. When you eat fat, fat has a very, very primal feedback pathway. So when you are in ketosis, when you're burning fat, you eat that fat goes into your fat cells. As those fat cells take up the fat, they release hormones, the primary one being leptin. There's about 4 or 5 hormones that they release. And that leptin goes back to your brain and says, dude, stop, you've had enough. But you feel full because leptin continues to work. It's not a flat line. It kind of rises up over time after the meal. So not only do you feel full very early into the meal, but you stay full for a very long time. In the second part of this talk, we're going to leverage that relationship between fat and leptin to control our calories, or really to allow the body to control the calories, so you never, ever, 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 ever have to worry about calories. Throw that word out. You don't have to use that word. You don't have to have a calculator. You don't have to do any math. You don't have to look at ratios or numbers or grams or calories. Throw all that stuff out. Let the body do its job. But the key thing is to understand that feedback. Here's the problem with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates have no feedback. So your brain decides how much you think you need to eat, just like the alcohol, and then whatever you put in front of you, you're going to eat because there's no feedback. We have to, at the start of this process, we have to relearn feedback. So you could have eaten a huge big steak and be, oh my God, I'm stuffed. 2 minutes later, you're not eating more steak, but you're eating ice cream, chocolates, chips. You might be finishing the rice or the pasta. You're doing a carbohydrate because leptin has no control over the carbohydrates. So it's critically important to understand feedback pathways, okay, and allow your body to do its job. So the next concept that I want to talk about are the essential the essential vitamins and minerals and the trace elements, the things they call micros. Guess what, Doug? They're all part of food. They're all in our food. That's how we've evolved as a species. So when you're eating food, there are very, very few foods that we eat that are in isolation. The only isolated pure carbohydrates are the sugars. If you're eating sucrose or malt sugar, that is a pure carbohydrate. And obviously that should be on the no list. On the other side of the spectrum, the only pure fat that we eat comes from oils and lard. And those arguably are extracted. So if, for example, you squeeze an olive, you extract olive oil. But that olive oil is a pure fat. There's nothing else with it. Same thing with lard. But everything in between is a combination. So remember, nutrition is a team sport. And what you want to do is to be able to have the combinations in as close to the way nature made it. So you and I are both from South Africa. In South Africa, we eat a lot of lamb. And if you look at a lamb chop, it's got this huge chunk of fat on the side. But in America, what have they done? They've cut all that fat away. So we have to remember to replace that so we're eating it in the right balance. All animal products, always, are a combination of some fat and some protein. And you want to get that ratio right, just by looking at it. When you move more to the vegetable materials, there's usually carbohydrates with protein and really not much fat. The real fats are going to be in your nuts and your seeds, and they typically contain fat, protein, and a little bit of carbohydrate. So depending on where you pitch yourself with your diet, you've got to pay attention to those combinations of food. I don't care, Doug, if you want to start as primarily a vegetarian who, if you don't like to harm animals, perhaps supplement your diet with a few renewable proteins or animal sources, the eggs and the cheese. On the other side of the spectrum, I don't care if you're a pure carnivore, but then please make sure you're a nose-to-tail carnivore. Why is that important? Not just because Americans typically just eat the muscles of animals. We eat the fish fillet, we eat the ribeye steak or the muscle ground beef or whatever it is. We eat the pork chop. We don't eat the rest of the animal. And that's where the important micronutrients are. So you can get your micronutrients from salads and vegetables or from organ meats. The single best organ meat you can eat, and I don't care if you're, ew, I'm not forcing you to eat this, is liver. So what are those essential parts? Well, the first essential group of things that we have to get in are the vitamins. And there are 8 B vitamins. There's 1 vitamin C, and they're water soluble. They occur in almost all vegetables and nuts and seeds, but they also are jam-packed in meats, particularly liver and the organ meats. So if you're eating bone marrow, if you're eating tripe, if you're eating liver, if you're a nose-to-tail person, that's where you're getting those rich vitamin B's and C's. Vitamins A, D, E, K, essential vitamins. Those 4 are fat-soluble vitamins. So if your vitamin D is low because you're not eating a lot of fat, and you take a vitamin D pill, totally 100% useless to you because there's no fat to absorb it. That's one of the reasons. There's actually 2 other reasons why vitamin D doesn't work. So I have patients all the time that have had low vitamin D for 5 years, and they've religiously been taking the vitamin D pills that their doctors give them. Guess what their vitamin D levels are? They're still in the toilet. They're still super low because supplements don't work. The key thing is there's tons of vitamin D in your food, but you've got to eat it with fat. So if you're going to take your food, drink it with a bit of whole milk maybe, or some cream, or eat it with a steak, eat it with some bacon, eat it with something that contains fat. And the best place to get it is from your food. The next critical group of elements that we have to get in are the minerals. And the minerals are divided into two groups. There are the minerals that we need in abundance, and there are about 8 of them. Those are sodium, chloride, calcium, magnesium, potassium, phosphate, and sulfur. And those are essential minerals that we have to take in. The one problem with our food is some of those minerals, particularly salt, is in low supply in all of those foods. All the others, the potassiums, the calciums, the magnesiums, they're there in abundance, particularly in the animal products, in the animal foods. But sodium chloride, salt, which is the most dominant electrolyte in the human body, the most important one, because it governs fluid volume, it governs blood pressure. The entire body is arranged, all the structures of the body that pertain to fluid management go through salt. And it's the one thing that we have to add to our diet because it is not in sufficient quantities in the normal food diet. That's why as a species, we've always chased salt. Salt mines, salt caravans. Salt has always been the most precious commodity. And we've traveled as a species all over the world looking for salt. Well, it's now available. Add it to your food. Don't ever be afraid of salt. Salt helps you to manage your fluid volume. When you pee, you don't pee out water. You pee out salt and the water chases the salt. When you sweat, you don't sweat water. You sweat salt and the water chases the salt. So the human body can get rid of excess salt very readily. Salt without carbohydrates does not cause hypertension. It will never ever cause the disease of hypertension. May bump your blood pressure up slightly, but it's not an issue. And in fact, my blood pressure, I'm sitting right here right now, and I eat tons of salt, is 110/60 off any medication. That's kind of a normal blood pressure. In fact, it's interesting that a blood pressure of 120/80 is probably abnormally high, but it's related to carbohydrate consumption. We'll talk about that down the road when we talk more about diseases. However, the one thing that you do want to add, almost like a supplement, but add it to your food so you're eating it with your food, is sodium chloride. A lot of people, when they start keto, get told, oh, my potassium's low, my magnesium's low, I got leg cramps. Well, that may be true, but again, don't look at the numbers. What happens in the kidney is that if you don't have enough salt on board, and people coming off a high carbohydrate diet, by definition, have low salt. Number one, they haven't been adding it to their food. And number two is they've peed that all out. Well, the kidney tries to conserve that salt because you're low in salt. And what does it replace the salt with to get rid of water? Potassium, magnesium, calcium. They function like salt in the kidney. So it's critically important. In fact, if you're on Lasix or hydrochlorothiazide, which are the 2 water tablets to get rid of that water, they actually drop your potassium level, and you have to supplement them with potassium. So when your doctor says, oh, at the beginning of keto, you're going to get muscle cramps and your magnesium, calcium, potassium are going to be low, don't supplement those. Supplement your salt. The body has tons of potassium on board. It's just inside your cells. Only 4% of the potassium is in your intravascular space. But most of your salt is in your intravascular space. So if your salt levels are adequate, it'll leach out that potassium, and potassium's levels will restore themselves. Occasionally, you may need to add a little bit of food with magnesium in it, but it's very, very rare. We way overcall that. So don't overcall the other electrolytes. Focus on the salt. The other minor trace elements are present in all the foods, but particularly liver. Those are your chromiums, your coppers, your iodine. And if you want to use iodized salt because you live in a low iodine area, we see endemic goiters in a lot of places, particularly in Africa. Iodine is used for the thyroid, and a lot of people have low thyroid disease. Well, it might be an autoimmune disease related to inflammation, but most commonly it's a lack of iodine in our diet. If you eat iodized salt, and you can buy it anywhere, you're going to replace that iodine. If you're eating red meat, you're getting plenty of iron and manganese and molybdenum, selenium, and zinc. And those are the things that we really require in small amounts, but they're present in our food, particularly animal food. So if you're eating adequate animal food, you're absolutely fine. And if you go through, if you just rewind and listen to this talk again, it pretty much provides everything that you need to have a very, very healthy diet. Oh my God, what about fiber? You didn't mention fiber. I didn't mention fiber on purpose. Fiber is totally way, 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 way overrated. A lion doesn't get much fiber in. It poops absolutely fine. So fiber comes along with our vegetables, along with our salads. If you're eating some vegetables and salads and some nuts, you're always going to get some fiber in, plenty. But the human body really doesn't need, the human body really does not need a huge amount of fiber. And if you're more on the carnivorous side, you don't get a lot of fiber and you're going to do absolutely fine. We've way overcalled fiber, and it's such a poorly understood thing. Zoe Harcum is an expert on this and will give a great talk. If you Google her and just Google her with the name Fibre, you can find out all about it and the real truth about fiber. But I did not mention fiber here because it's overrated. It comes along with some of the foods we eat, but don't go ballistic with fiber. If you're a little bit constipated, there's easy ways to get rid of that. The commonest thing, remember the drug called Allied that they used to use when we thought that fat was the cause of obesity? Well, what Allied does is it blocks the absorption of fat in the gut. And guess what the side effect of that was? Fecal seepage. In other words, you shat yourself because all that fat made diarrhea, caused diarrhea, and you pooped your pants. And that was kind of a disincentive to eating fat because they believed fat was the cause of obesity. Well, when you eat fat, there's exactly the same effect. So if you want to, if your bowel movements are a little bit constipated, bump up your fat and you're going to be just fine. And sometimes cheese can cause a bit of constipation. Don't go crazy taking a whole bunch of pills and laxatives. I've never met somebody who exploded because they were constipated. Your body's going to take care of itself. It might be a bit uncomfortable. Bump up your fat ratio and you're going to be just fine, particularly the oils. So don't sweat that. You can balance this. And remember, homeostasis is the order of the day. That's how the human body works. So if you understand that as a diet, you understand what you're doing. The final couple of seconds are going to be spent on this. A fat person, very simply, is somebody who no longer primarily eats for the nutritional value. We eat for the endorphin value. We've talked about that in the previous chapter. However, when you start eating food that conforms to the structure that I've just talked about, guess what? You have nothing in your life right now to manage your emotional needs. So it's critically important as part of this, in the second part you hear me talk about this, that you understand two concepts about the endorphin system. The first concept is you need to build up a repertoire of things that you can do that activate the endorphin system, that take time and effort, that relax you. Whether that is something that comes from the creative arts group, the meditative spirituality group, the physical activity group, the human connection group, the sexuality group, those are the 5 fundamental things that I'd like you to begin to work on to build up a repertoire of endorphin management strategies that are inherent to who we are as a species. Every one of those has advantages to the species. And if you've got diversity, none of them will get out of hand like your carbohydrate consumption, your obesity did. So it's critically important as you go back to eating nutritionally that you replace the carbs not only with real food, but also with an effective behavior management pattern. And then there's one other thing that I'd like you to think about. The human brain needs a break about every 20 to 30 minutes. It is unable to focus for longer than that. And the endorphin system not only relaxes us when life throws emotional curveballs at us, but the endorphin system is also critically important at helping us to give us those little mind breaks. And everybody can be defined by that mind break. So the smoker every 20 to 30 minutes is thinking of a cigarette, the religious person saying a prayer, the chatty person is having a little conversation with someone, and the fat person is eating about every 20 to 30 minutes, not for their body, but for their brain. That doesn't change, but you can change what you eat or what you put into your mouth as a response to that need to activate the endorphin system. We've talked about this before. The difference between a snack and a bridge is this. Number one, a snack is always an emotional event, but a snack is a calorie-containing emotional event that adds to your caloric load when your body doesn't need it. And I don't care if you change from eating M&Ms and drinking Coke to eating cheese and pepperoni. It's keto, but all because it doesn't contain carbohydrates, it's not appropriate to eat to manage your brain. What you want to define for yourself is a term that I coined called a bridge. A bridge is something we drink typically that gets us over that, oh, I need something, but it has no caloric content. In my case, I went from a can of Coke to coffee. I don't drink the coffee, but I have it available for me all the time, and I just keep sipping on it on a regular basis as that little mind-cleansing moment. I mean, if you think about driving on a long journey in the summer and you get all these bugs on your windshield, every 20 minutes or so, you just hit the windshield wipers and you clean the shield, and you can drive with a clean shield. Exactly the same way for the brain. So institutionalize, ritualize a bridge item in your life. I don't care if it's water with Crystal Light. That's what my wife loves to do. I drink coffee. I don't care if it's anything that doesn't contain calories. Preferably something you can carry around with you can drink. Could be a piece of gum. But ritualize that as that emotion management event. And if you put those two together, if you return to eating and drinking for the nutritional value, and you manage those two aspects of your endorphin requirements, guess what? You can't be fat and unhealthy from a metabolic perspective. So we've sorted out obesity, we're sorting out diabetes, we'll discuss that in a separate section. But this is the way forward. The problem with this is it's almost impossible to do it once. If 80+% of the calories that you consume are carbohydrates, you cannot, it's extremely difficult to say, okay, today I start. But that's how diets work, don't they? Here's your diet, off you go, start. And you have a day, boom, I'm doing this 100%. The shock is too much for the human body. When you look at how pervasive carbohydrates and the active snacking are in the human body, in the human world, when you're an obese person, I call it the elephant. When you step back and you look at this, it's like, oh my God, it's so big, it's an elephant. How do you eat an elephant? Oh my God, I can't eat an elephant. Of course you can. You cut the elephant up into little pieces and you eat one piece at a time, you can eat the elephant. And that's the forerunner to the next segment of this, is how do I start? So the critical thing, starting keto when you're obese, starting keto as a treatment, as a lifestyle change for keto, is not a diet. So don't start it like a diet. You're going to avoid the keto flu. You're going to allow yourself to fat adapt if you eat the elephant slowly. If you are that tortoise that's taking a baby step every day, instead of the rabbit that comes running out of the gates, does everything, and then just crashes and burns or falls asleep on the side of the road because you hate the keto flu. So let's talk about how to start this in a safe, easy way.
But I have to ask you some questions first.
Sure, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I got shat on by some of the people that watch these videos saying that I interrupt you. So I've been trying not to do that and take notes so I can ask you at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, so you talked about all the micronutrients and everything that you need are in the food that we eat, right?
Yes.
But I've heard statements, at least, about the fact that that may have been true back in the day, but today, when everything with the animals, they're all being injected and fed in lots. The vegetables and stuff, they're doing all sorts of genetic things and spraying with insecticides and blah blah blah. And the theory is that at the end of the day, the food that we eat today does not contain all the stuff that it used to contain. Is that just scaremongering, or is that true?
I think there's a small component of that. Obviously, there are elements of that have truth to them. But here's my approach, Doug. The problem is you're fat, and what you put in your face is going to kill you. Mm-hmm. Carbohydrates are going to kill you. That is the huge, big thing. So, the ideal thing for somebody, let me ask you this question. What is healthier for you? The air on top of the Rocky Mountains or the air in Times Square of New York at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon? What's healthier to breathe?
I would say the Rocky Mountains.
Here's the thing, Doug. It doesn't matter if you smoke. It's more important to quit smoking. So, as long as you quit smoking, I don't care. Obviously, it's ideal to breathe the Rocky Mountain air.
Right.
But I'd rather you breathe the air in Times Square and not smoke. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The goal here is to get rid of the carbohydrates, to get rid of the maximum disease-causing things. And you've got to live life. So we're not looking for perfection. The people that have that commentary, if I gave them a lump of gold and a bird had pooped on one little corner of it, are they going to say, no, I don't want this gold because there's bird poop on it? Hell no. Okay? You're going to take it and you clean the poop off. So we've got to make do. We've evolved. Okay? We've got to make do with what's there. Yes, in the ideal world, you want grass-fed beef. But I'd much rather you eat beef than pasta and pizza.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's feedlot stuff. Okay? So some of it's cost, some of it's practicality. You know, there are people that are totally vested in this, and they'll go to the farmers markets and source their food. There's some people that just don't have the capacity to do that. And I'd rather them go to Walmart or Publix or Costco and source just general stuff, even as GMO, genetically modified stuff, because it's a hell of a lot better than the crap they get in packages and bags that people manufacture. So we're not looking for perfection. And that's my argument to this. You know, we can talk perfection all day long. We can talk perfection quite happily, but we're going to get so stuck in perfect that we're not going to talk about good enough.
All right.
You know,
that was your
in
San Diego, you kept making that statement when we were talking about the standard of care. You know, that what is it? Perfection is the greatest enemy of good enough.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And that's, you know, so yes, you want to strive for perfection. If you can afford grass-fed beef, that's fine. But even the beef that you buy that's grass-fed has had the fat cut off. The ideal thing to do is to, and this is what we plan to do, is get a couple of people together, go to a farmer, select a nice fat cow, an Angus cow, something like that.
Yeah.
Have them slaughter it, and then because it's huge, you got to have a fridge space, but separate that out in 4 or 5. You can buy that. That's how we grew up in South Africa.
Yeah.
But in this country, not everybody can do that. So sometimes we have to make do with what we can and make those slightly better choices than the crap that's on the shelves.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to the organ meat, but just talking about that, a lot of the places it's like in Vons or Ralph's or something like that, and you can see it. You can see the lines where they've actually cut the fat off, and there might be a little bit of fat left on it, but you can see that they've cut a bunch of it off. But you can. What people don't realize is you can actually go to the butcher that is in the back there and say, hey, dude, there's this package that you made of ribeye steaks. Don't you want to go and get like a fresh pack out of the back there and just cut them for me without cutting and trimming anything off? It happened to me when I was making some curry where we kind of normally put half organ meat in with some kind of regular steak type of meat. And they'd run out of kidneys, and I asked the guy if he had a heart. And he went to the back and he came out with this vacuum sealed part. And he cut the plastic off and he threw this thing on his big desk at the back there, and he started slicing the fat off. And I said, no, wait.
Yeah. Give that to me. Yeah.
Put that all back in there, man. So I made him like put it all back in and package it up, and I took it home, and that's what all of that stuff I threw into the curry, and it was absolutely brilliant.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I think, you know, what you just said is important, Doug, because a lot of Americans are uncomfortable eating organ meats.
Yeah.
But you can camouflage them.
Right.
You can put them in curry. You know, for example, I'll take a whole roast chicken and toss it in the crock pot, and I'll throw a bucket of livers in there. I know my kids hate liver. One of my kids hates liver. But if you camouflage it, if you put it in there and you eat that mush that falls off the bone, you don't even taste that you're getting the liver in.
Right.
You can camouflage that so you can get things. You don't need a huge amount.
Yeah.
And if you can camouflage it, like in your curry, you've camouflaged that. You tell people that that's what you got. I'll give you another example. We had a Spanish evening one night, and we made tequila. But we didn't make the tequila with the lemonade. We used water and Crystal Light. And we put that, and nobody knew that's what they were drinking.
Yeah.
So there are ways that we can we can remove the sugar from things. You can put the right stuff in. It's called camouflaging your food. And you just got to be comfortable with it. You know, but there's such a beautiful spectrum of food that you don't have to only eat all the organ meats. For example, there are some folks, and I listen to them intently because I struggle to understand the concept of the vegetarian keto person, keto vegan. And one of them spoke at LowCarbUSA in West Palm Beach. Gave a great talk. Now, the reality is it's not a vegan meal. It's a supplemented vegan meal.
Right.
Even I'm going to drop a name here. I'll just go blank. A guy that you might have heard of called Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton, I bumped into him in the hospital about 2 years ago, and he'd lost a dramatic amount of weight. And he was worried, and he said, he loves to talk. So we started chatting in the corridor. And I told him that I'm a ketogenic surgeon. And he said, wow, that's cool. And I asked him what his diet was. And he said, I'm a vegan. So he's converted to, but he said, I'm a cheating vegan. I eat fish twice a week. I eat a little bit of egg here and there. I've stopped eating the McDonald's. I've stopped eating that stuff. But the person he was seeing was basically a keto vegetarian or a keto vegan. And he was getting everything in, but he was on the vegetarian spectrum.
Yeah.
I'm more on the carnivorous spectrum. I'm not going to tell you where to pitch yourself. That's my bias. It's not about me, but I'm going to tell you that you want to get everything in that you need from that list I just talked about.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why I had Will in West Palm Beach, and we had Ali Miller there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like I need to actually present that side of it, because there are people that have an ethical or a religious reason to feel like they need to be vegetarian or vegan, and I need to respect that and try to help them. Okay, if that's how you feel, then this is how you can do it. And like you say, but what that does mean is it requires a lot of supplementation to actually make that happen.
Right. But you know what you don't need, if you have to supplement your diet, GNC is not a food store. If you have to supplement your diet, you are on a diet of malnutrition.
Right.
If
I
you
totally
can get
agree.
everything you need
And that's why I say I will argue with those people. If they want to talk about it, they're going to do the vegetarian diet or the vegan diet because it's the most healthy. Goodness me,
it's not.
We're in for a major discussion here.
It's clearly a diet of malnutrition. I agree.
But if it's a religious reason, then that's what it is, and so therefore we need to help you. And so,
but you know what's interesting, Doug? There's no religion. There's no fundamental religion, and this is interesting. I've had a few debates and discussions with some of the leadership who precludes you from using what I call renewable animal sources of food. So milk, cheese, eggs.
Totally,
the animal doesn't die for that.
They can at least.
And an egg, right? And an egg is basically a whole chicken.
Mm.
If you start, I've had this discussion with vegan evangelists where they say, well, all those chickens should have their eggs hatch. But you know what? And it was a young kid. And you know the argument, and it was just somebody who'd bought into internet gobbledygook. So she was telling me, well, you shouldn't eat eggs because you're depriving a chicken of life. Well, then, my girl, you should get pregnant with every cycle. Yeah. Because every time you have a period, you're destroying your egg. Think about that, okay?
Yeah, no, totally.
And I'm sorry, if you're not having a baby from when you're 13, 12 or 13 years old and pregnant continuously, you're destroying eggs. Don't come at me with that argument. I mean, it's just, you can get into the silliness of this, and we've been down that road. And guess what? That person has done amazingly well. She's maintained her vegan diet, but she supplements. And she supplements now with eggs and cheese and dairy, and she's fine.
Yeah.
And more, for the first time this past couple of weeks, I've seen full cream yogurt. You know, we get the double cream and the full cream yogurt in South Africa, which has got very, very few carbohydrates. I've never seen that on the shelves here. Now I'm starting to get it at Publix, our local big grocery store.
Right.
So, you know, more and more we're becoming comfortable with selling foods that contain fat.
Yeah.
I think the big one is to get them not to cut the fat off the food. Cut the fat off the meat.
Right. Yeah.
Take the skin off of some animals, but then put the animal on my plate. And you know what? If I don't like the fat, I'll cut it off.
Cut it off.
But
Exactly.
give it to me. And you know what? If I don't want to pay for it, I won't pay for it. But I can ask you to cut. But don't do it for me.
Right.
And that's a change in mentality I'd love to see the big butcher stores make.
Yeah.
Is give me the food as it came from God or nature, and I'll decide which pieces I'm going to eat of it. Yeah. You know, the other thing they do is they cut the bone marrow away. They take that little slug of bone marrow out of the chop. Now, I understand that was because there was a concern about mad cow disease and Jakob Creutzfeldt virus that lived in the marrow. But we screen for that. These animals are clean of that. Mm. And quite frankly, if you're worried about that, become a vegan. Don't eat any meat, okay? But an egg, for example, is a whole chicken. It's got everything in it that's required to make a chicken. Yeah. So if a vegan just does that from time to time, you're fine. So, you know, there are these discussions because ultimately your beliefs are important, but your life's also kind of important.
Kind of, yeah.
And and you just cannot get adequate in pill form from GNC.
So I just want to go back to organ meat for a minute, because you mentioned that camouflaging it is a way you can do it, and I had that with Pam, and I mean we started one of the famous from Nando's and peri peri chicken livers, right? Mm-hmm. Is one of their big selling items. And
Yes.
so there was a South African thing here in South Africa where they served that, and Pam was like completely freaked out by the whole concept of livers and everything. But she tried. I had it the one day in this restaurant in San Diego here, and she tried a little bit, and she said, "Oh, wait a minute, this is actually really good," you know. And that's why with the curries that I normally do like a steak and kidney, and do like half kidneys and half London broil or something like that. And but then we make it with a curry. And in the beginning, she used to pick out the steak, and now I have to fight her for the kidneys. You know.
Right. No, absolutely right. And,
if I leave it to your own devices, I don't get any kidney out of the thing. So
I have this discussion with a lot of my American patients. Now, if I'm dealing with the Haitians, they're totally fine eating the stuff. The Jamaicans, and in Florida, we have a lot of island people. We have South Americans, South Africans that are comfortable with some of the organs. However, here's the discussion I have with most of my patients. And if you're listening to this podcast, ask yourself this question. If you hear us talking about liver and you say, "Oh, that's disgusting, I'll never eat liver," ask yourself this question. When last in your life did you actually eat some liver? And most of them say, "I can't remember," or "it was as a child." Well, if you haven't had liver in the last decade, in the last 10 years, that is a mental block. That isn't something. Try it once. And you know what? If you try it once and you say, "That's still the most disgusting thing I've ever tasted," stay away from it. There's other things you can have. But you might say to yourself, "Hey, this is not so bad." Now, don't go and bring home an old calf liver and cook it and stink up the place.
I would say exactly that. Is do like, try it once, but try it once in a reasonable situation, like make some curry or something like that, and put some kidney or some liver or some heart in there, and then try it and see, because I think most people would be surprised that it's all a mental thing. It actually doesn't taste. There's some slight variation in the flavors, but it's like,
but you really don't notice that it's there. The other option is, instead of making it at home, because you get into the whole making thing and your mind starts turning, go to a restaurant where maybe they serve some foie gras, or go to a restaurant where they serve something. And foie gras is one of the most tasty things you can have.
Right.
Okay, it's a non-alcoholic steatohepatitis liver of a goose that's been force-fed corn, but it's still liver. And the point is, if you can comfortably try something that a good chef has made, then you're going to develop, "Hey, this is not so bad."
Right.
And then you can start. It's getting used to the concept. And now, again, I'm not going to force anybody, but don't tell me that you don't like it if you've never tried it.
Exactly. At least try and get your head around it, because if you can, it's massively beneficial for you.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So fiber. When I was doing our keto coaching, keto 101 type thing that we developed on our website many years back now, I was researching this whole thing about fiber, and I came across a book called The Fiber Menace by Konstantin. I can't remember his name here. He's some Russian guy. It's on our site. But if you look up Fiber Menace, you'll find it. But he totally blows this myth about the fact that we have to have fiber out of the water completely. And his idea is that fiber is the thing that actually causes constipation. And people,
I would support that, Doug. I would support that.
People eat more and more fiber because they believe they've got issues, and then they take more and more laxatives, and it's just this catch-22, never-ending cycle that you eat more fiber and take more laxatives, and you think you're taking both of them to help your constipation, but what's actually happening is both of them are kind of working against each other. And it's a fabulous book, and I've got a huge section called the Scoop on Poop in my coaching session that is by far the most popular, most visited section when amongst all the people that have gone through that course.
What's interesting, Doug, is Americans are obsessed with their bowel function more so than any other population. And a large part of what I do for a living is make people who can't poop, and make people who poop too much poop less. I'm a surgeon, particularly kids. So we understand bowel management programs. We understand bowel dysfunction, because a lot of kids are born with abnormalities. So we understand that side of things. But you're absolutely right. Fiber is totally overrated. And fiber really became an important concept for two reasons. Number one, with the food pyramid, when we started telling people why it was important to eat grains and a lot of the, you got to have your grain helpings and your fruit helpings. And they they sold a lot of that because you need fiber. Okay. The second thing is that fiber is an easily manufactured thing. And a lot of people, a lot of manufacturers falsely used the concept of fiber to sell stuff. And you'll still see that advertised on a lot of products, high in fiber, high in fiber. But the fiber that they're putting in there actually is not good fiber, or so-called good fiber. You get soluble fiber, you get your gross fiber. And I don't want to go down the road of fiber, but fiber is very heavily overrated.
Yeah.
It's basically a source of retaining fluid in your bowels, in your poop, to make it soft. The only value of the human colon is to absorb salt and water.
Right.
And if your transit time is adequate, you don't need a mass amount of water. In fact, you want your colon to remove that adequate water, but leave it soft enough. And there's certain things that bind you up a little bit, but fat is our best. Fat is our best by far colonic irrigant.
Yeah. Totally.
And if you just bump up your soluble fat content, you will poop. You know, in the old days, it was mineral oil. It was that's just fat. That's stuff that we took to make us poop. Cod liver oil was a big one.
Yeah, it's just oil.
You know, those were oils, and that's fat. But because we became lipophobic, we went away from using fat as a laxative, which is the body's normal laxative. That's why lions poop, because they eat a lot of fat. And we moved across to this vegetable fiber. And you're right. You know, cows use that. They use some of it. But cellulose.
But they can process cellulose. We can't. That's
exactly right. But that cellulose will ferment in our guts. And it's not bioabsorbable, but that causes problems. So I agree completely with you. And fiber is a great talk that you give it, I give that talk. Maybe we can do a completely separate segment of that. And I've stolen a lot of ideas from people like Zoe and a few other folks who really come down on this pretty hard. But it's totally overrated, and primarily it's overrated because it makes people money.
Yeah, I agree with.
The other easy thing with fiber, when people, oh, doc, my bowels are not working. Oh, you need to increase your fiber. It becomes an easy, it's what I call a Gomer thing. Get out of my emergency room. It's something we can tell people to take. Because your constipation is going to resolve it no matter what. You're not going to explode, as I said. But if you tell people to do something, oh, go take some Metamucil, go and drink some orange juice, or whatever crap they tell you to take, it gives you something to do for a few days so you get out of their office, because the problem's going to be self-limiting. It's going to solve itself. But if you tell people that, oh, no, I want a solution right now. We're so pill-minded. We're so therapy-minded. But that's a separate issue. So, you know, that's my take on fiber. And I think there is so much more about it, but I really think it's overrated.
I agree. So the last thing just on this section anyway was you made mention of the keto flu. And I think from personal experience, I think there's a lot more made of the keto flu than it actually needs to be. And the reason I say that is because I feel like, yes, your body's not used to creating ketones from fat, right? And so you deplete the glycogen stores, you drop all the carbohydrates out of your diet, you deplete the glycogen stores, and your body's not used to processing fat to make ketones, although it's geared to do that. It's not used to doing it. And so maybe there's this little bit of lag where you feel a bit down energetically before it gets it, like, hey, I need to start converting fat to ketones. But I feel that the majority of the awful feeling that people have during that time is what I experienced because I didn't know better, and that was that I didn't have enough salt. Because I was an athlete and carbohydrate loading and all of that stuff, I didn't add salt to anything ever. And now suddenly I chucked all the carbohydrates out of my diet, and now obviously I really struggled with hypotension. Is that right? Really low blood pressure.
I mean, that's actually normal, but it's
yeah. But you know, I mean, literally, but it was for like 2 months. And I would be sitting at work, and I would stand up at my desk, and I would literally have to hold on to the desk for a bit for things to stabilize before I would walk. And then I finally found out about the salt thing, and I was mortified. And I went into the kitchen. I took like a teaspoon of salt, put it in the palm of my hand, and I literally just ate it. and half an hour later, and from then onwards, I have never had a problem again.
Yeah, and your head, the top of your head didn't explode because of hypertension.
No, nothing. It was just.
But here's what's interesting, Doug. I've spoken to you several times. We've talked outside of the actual construct of I've got to talk about salt. I go, no. You're absolutely right.
Now I
salt
brought it up again, right?
Yeah, no. But salt is a cornerstone. I'm going to discuss that in the second part, in the next part. But here's the other concept, Doug, and I think this is a crucial concept. We are used to doing diets. And as I said, on a diet, you go and see somebody, or you read up about it, you buy the book, and you have what's called a quit day. Today, I'm going to go from eating like this to eating like this. And you do it all in one day. The human body. So if I took you, you're an athlete, okay? If I took you out today and I said, okay, let's run a marathon.
Can do, right?
Okay, but you try, let's say, okay, we're going to go run a marathon. And you try to run as far as you can, and you collapse. How do you feel the next day?
Really bad.
Awful. You can't move. You're paralyzed.
Yeah.
What do you think happens to the human body if you say, I'm going to quit carbohydrates today, I'm going to eat a ton of fat tomorrow?
Right.
You overwhelm all the systems. But if I take you and I say, okay, let's go for a walk today. Let's walk and jog tomorrow. And you do the kind of the couch to 5K, and you train every day. And after about 2 or 3 months, you should be able to run maybe a half marathon comfortably. Exactly the same way about keto. And the most critical thing for me when I talk to my patients is, look, guys, this is a way of life. You've been doing this for your whole life. You're not going to start doing this tomorrow and feel great. So starting keto, and there's 2 phases. The one is starting the ketogenic diet to get your body used to using fat rather than sugar. You're ramping up systems and you're ramping down systems. And then when you're in deep ketosis, how do we consolidate that? So there's 2 phases to a ketogenic diet, but this is not a diet, it's a way of life. So don't start it like a diet. And that's what we're going to talk about right now.
Okay.
That's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.